The quest to win the West continues for the Winnipeg Jets as they take on the New Jersey Devils. Should it be an easier opponent? Perhaps, but nothing is guaranteed in the NHL.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously the Jets are still riding high off of a big win against the Washington Capitals. The Caps actually just lost, and that makes some interesting things possible for the Jets over the next couple of weeks. But I think the biggest thing for Winnipeg, right, more than anything, is they are trying to win the West. And that is a pretty challenging prospect right now, not because the Jets are in any particular trouble, but, some of their opponents are starting to catch up. In particular, the Dallas Stars, man, they are hot on Winnipeg's heels, and don't overlook Vegas either. Vegas is maybe a little bit further behind, but, both the Knights and Stars do have a game in hand on the Jets, and so every win now for the Jets holds that much more significance. The games where maybe Winnipeg dropped points against, like Buffalo, you don't really have as much margin to do that. The President's Trophy would be great, but I think more than anything, Winnipeg has its eyes on just winning the conference first. The President's Trophy is kind of like a really, really, really nice to have, but it's not, in my mind, the most important thing. Making sure you have home ice advantage throughout the playoffs and that you keep the seeds roughly in the same order that they are right now, that is a much bigger thing. And for the Jets, they're going to have to first start off with a game against the New Jersey Devils. Now, things in New Jersey haven't exactly been super smooth. We just saw this Devils team a couple weeks ago. Winnipeg smashed them 6-1. And, I did kind of get bit in previous games predicting Jets wins, but I feel like this is a pretty decent one where Winnipeg really does have an opportunity to take down the same team twice and come out on top. New Jersey's last 10 games have not been particularly great. They do have some wins against like the Blue Jackets and Blackhawks, but there are some really bad losses, including losses to the Stars and Jets. They have a loss to the Flames, the Sens, Vancouver, and it's not entirely all their fault. They are just pretty beat up, and I think things have really spiraled the last couple of months as the injuries continue to mount, and the Devils are sort of just running really on fumes. You look at their team, and they're still decent, but you're looking at a lineup that's really missing Hughes, and their back end is also beat to heck. Up front, they've got Palat, Hischier, and Meyer. Then they've got Howla, Mercer, and Bratt. On the third, Cotter, Dowling, and Nason. And then on the fourth, Tatar, Lazar, and Bastion. So that forward group is definitely not what they usually like to have. Jack Hughes is such a big loss here. Very clearly one of their best skaters, arguably maybe their most important. And, at this point, I just think the Devils are really trying to pull together as much as they can, but it's been difficult, right? The goal support has been okay, relatively speaking, but still, not great. I think the defensive back end is where things are really starting to look pretty patchwork. On the back end, they've got the other Hughes and Pesci together, then Dumoulin and Kovacevic, and finally Dillon and Nemitz. This is like it's a solid back end, but I think, again, missing Dougie, that's a pretty big loss. Hamilton is one of their biggest shot creators and one of their most active offensive blue liners. And for Winnipeg, this is a great opportunity, right? This Devils team is missing Siegenthaler, Hamilton, and Hughes, Jack in this case. these are pretty large players, especially for how the Devils like to play. Now, it doesn't completely explain everything that's happened to New Jersey. There have just been some inconsistency issues, and Kovacevic actually got called out by Sheldon Keefe the other day because he was talking about this Devils team needing to adopt a playoff mindset, and Keefe basically said Kovacevic needed to play better, which to me is very funny because when you look at the underlying numbers, Kovacevic has generally been one of their strongest performers, regardless of whether the Devils are winning or losing. So I'm not quite sure what the disconnect there is, but very clearly some not great vibes for both the Devils and their fans. The Jets, I would suspect, are not likely to make any particular changes. The only changes at practice that we saw were like Tanev on the first line, just because Kyle Connor is a dad now. Congrats to him and his wife. That's awesome. I'm sure they have to be super excited. Maybe he'll teach his kid to back check from the start. I don't know. But huge congrats to their family. That's a fantastic moment. And I'm sure that, he is super excited. And Luke Schenn also actually went back home to Nashville, I believe, to spend some time with his family, which there was actually somebody on Twitter, and I don't know if they were just rage baiting, but if they were legitimately complaining about Schenn going back to Nashville to hang out with his family, I just wonder what we're even doing here, right? But as far as the Jets lineups are concerned, I don't anticipate anything looking too different here against the Devils. I think they'll still do, Connor Scheifele, Iafallo, Ehlers, Lowry, and Appleton, Niederreiter, Nemesnikov, and Perfetti, and then Tanev, Kupari, and Barron. I would say I still think the Jets might want to swap like Perfetti and Iafallo, to be honest. I know that defensively they were really good against the Caps, but Perfetti is starting to really drive his own bus. He's been so good, and I kind of feel like Iafallo just makes a little more sense on a line that's really forechecking oriented. And I think if you get Perfetti up there with Connor and Scheifele, you might get a little more offense out of that first line. They've been a little quiet, again, as of late, which is not super surprising. It's been an on and off issue. And then I would also probably look at maybe trying Ehlers, Lowry, and Iafallo together. I know Appleton had that snipe in the last game, but again, I kind of think it's one of those situations where you just want to see if you can maybe squeeze out some really good combinations. 27, 17, and 9 actually have played together before, and they actually played pretty well as a trio. So, maybe you can generate a little more offense that way. Against the Devils, I don't know if it's necessarily that much of a concern, but with the Jets' power play recently kind of looking a little bit under the weather, especially now that Velarde is sidelined, I just think you have to try and optimize just a little bit more. Again, I don't know if this is really going to be a problem in Friday's game if they just leave the lines as is. I would think we'd probably see a pretty similar situation. Winnipeg definitely traded offense in the last game for defense, which against the Caps, I think is probably a pretty okay sacrifice. You shut down a lot of what makes the Caps so dangerous. You limit their offense, you limit their counters, and you pulled out a big overtime win. So I don't think you can really complain about that. And for the Jets, I think that this is probably a fair approach given your current lineup situation. It was a very playoff style game. This one I don't think is going to be quite that way just because I don't think the Devils actually have the horses to make it a tight defensive forechecking game. I think this is going to be one where the Jets are probably fairly in control from the start. I've said that before, and sometimes I get in trouble, but I do think that this is one of those games where the Jets, in theory, should come away with a strong 2 points. But give me your score predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. My score prediction for this game is going to be 4-2 Winnipeg. I feel like I say 4-2 a lot, and it never works out. Maybe one time the Jets can actually spot me a good scoreline that's actually one of my predictions. That would be fun, especially when it is a victory. But again, drop your score predictions in the comments below. Now, amidst all of this, I did talk about Dallas kind of being a little bit hot on Winnipeg's heels, but they're not the only ones that are chasing the top seed in the West, right? Now, this doesn't really matter as much as specifically hoping that Dallas doesn't win the Central, but there are some reasons why Winnipeg probably doesn't want Vegas to supplant them for that first seed in the West too. So we'll chat about that in just a brief moment, but before we do, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Trade Coffee. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cuppa, but I got tired of settling for grocery store brands that are watery and just not that great. That's why I turned to Trade, and let me tell you, this coffee is next level. Trade is the number one specialty coffee marketplace in the US, bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of brews, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. It's an easy subscription, and there's no more last minute grocery store visits or scrounging around your cupboards looking for maybe that last little bit of Maxwell or something. We all know that you need a higher quality brew. And as somebody who's personally a big coffee connoisseur, I can tell the difference when you've got good, nice Costa Rican coffee beans versus some ordinary one. It does really make a difference, and sometimes it can be a big change in your mood before you get to work. And if you don't love your first bag, don't worry about it. Trade will replace it for free until they get it right. So right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade trade.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first order. Drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about some interesting stuff for the race for the Eastern Conference. Obviously, the Jets are in pretty decent straits right now, but they only have a fairly narrow lead over Dallas, and increasingly in terms of the West, it's not just the Stars that the Jets might be a little concerned about. Vegas is kind of not hanging around too closely, but within enough of a distance to where you start to wonder if the Jets were to maybe hit a bit of a stumbling block, would the Knights perhaps have a shot at moving closer to that number one seed? And talking about the Knights first, this is not really a scenario we've really talked about because it wasn't really on my radar until just a little bit ago. But for this wild card race, right? Let's just assume that, say, the Knights go on some crazy heater and they were to pass to the Jets. Again, I don't really think that that's all that likely. 8 points is a fair bit. And even with a game in hand, you're still talking with at least a 6-point margin that they would have to get past. And it's not like the Jets are suddenly not going to keep winning games. Winnipeg is probably going to get at least a handful of points out of the next couple of road games. And so for the Pacific, actually, and this includes a game against Vegas too. So for Vegas, I think I'm less worried about them, but in a world where the Knights were to somehow win the West, assuming that, Dallas and Winnipeg don't do it first, that does make things a little bit interesting for the Jets. If Winnipeg still wins the Central, but Vegas wins the West, suddenly you would have to see the Jets getting that first wild card spot. And if it's the Wild that are there, that's actually an okay result, right? Then Vegas gets St. Louis one way or another. So for the Jets, it might not be as bad if that happens. But I think that's a fairly unlikely scenario. I think whoever wins the West is going to come out of the Central. I just don't see it being Vegas right now unless something really crazy happens. 11 games is some time to figure something out, and they're on a 4-game winning streak. So I don't want to write it off completely, but I think that scenario is probably back of mind right now. The one that's a little more concerning for the Jets is Dallas not really stumbling. Right now, they're actually playing against Calgary. They are currently leading 3-2. I don't think the Flames are going to pull this one off unless I'm really surprised. So assuming that, then this margin for error kind of shrinks a lot. It's only a 4-point difference. They'll have the same amount of games played. And I think for me, it just really solidifies the importance of the Jets having a very big next week of hockey. They're not going to be perfect, right? Winnipeg can't be perfect. It's just going to be one of those scenarios where the Jets are going to have to do what they can, take care of business as much as they can, and hope that Dallas isn't able to take points out of every single game. And I think it's not going to happen, right? Dallas may not have the hardest schedule remaining, but for the Jets, I just think Winnipeg is going to have to take care of its own work. The Stars are going to be seeing some teams like the Kraken. They'll see, Nashville and Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, that's not great news for the Jets because a lot of these teams are not great. But Winnipeg still does have a game with them on the road. So, there's opportunities to take out some points. And again, I don't think it's going to be that the Stars are going to guarantee to beat every single one of these teams. I mean, they've dropped points recently to the Oilers. I will say that, looking back at their schedule, they haven't dropped a lot of points lately, so I don't want to get too excited here. But for me, I think it just really stresses the importance of why the Jets are going to have to play some of their best hockey and do it all without Gabriel Velarde. That is very challenging. They've already done it against the Caps, so I think that is probably a nice feather in the cap, something that makes you feel really good going into your last 10. But all I can say is it's going to be tough, right? Some of these opponents that the Jets are going to face are teams that have traditionally given them some of their worst road performances. So for the Jets, this is going to have to come down to bearing down, being the best version of yourself that you can, and probably playing some real playoff style hockey, which if the Jets do what they did against Washington in games against LA and Vegas, I think you've got a good shot. But that may not happen, right? The Jets may have a couple of rough performances. It's just the nature of the beast, right? So, getting points where you can, making sure that you try and stay as up the race as you can. It is going to be difficult. I won't lie. I'm really hoping that the Flames somehow pull this one off against Dallas. The Stars are playing some fantastic hockey lately, and if there's any way that these teams can steal some points off of them, that'd be great. The Flames have actually been, apparently massively outshooting the Stars in this game, so crossing fingers. But yeah, it's going to come down to the wire. I was really feeling better about this a week or so ago, for the Jets to win the West. It's getting pretty tight, man. It is close. Winnipeg, I think, has real tough competition right now. And, the Jets' schedule is just not fair, unfortunately. Winnipeg has a really tough finish to the season. But you know what? You can only do so much. You can't always control who you play. You've just got to go out there and do your best. And I think Winnipeg so far has had some up and down performances as of late, but I do think that they have the capability of coming through this on the other side. If things do get a little out of hand and the Jets are then faced with a likely first round against Colorado, that would be that's a tough one, right? But I guess the flip side is if you vanquish the Avs, you can guarantee that they're out. And then, maybe Dallas would get something like the Blues. Right now, the wild card race is really close. The Wild did win today against Washington, but the Blues also just beat the Preds too. So, yeah, this is a very, very tight race. I mean, there's no calling it yet. And, as these teams continue to jockey for position, I just think it's fascinating to watch all of this unfold. This has been one of the better playoff races that we've seen. I feel like the West just doesn't have that many weak links anywhere in this playoff picture. I know the Wild I've kind of disparaged a lot lately, but even they can play some decent hockey, so it's not like I want to just crap all over them either. They can be decent. So for the Jets, this is going to be a very interesting next few weeks. And all I can say is we're all going to have to buckle up. I'm prepared for a very rocky ride. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think we're all going to be doing a lot of scoreboard watching. But, you compare it to like the Eastern Conference where I don't think anyone wants to win. And I don't think anyone actually wants to get the wild card spots. It's just such a contrast of quality. And, to me, it at least explains some of why maybe the Caps haven't faced as much resistance on their side of the bracket. Imagine if the Caps were in the West, they may not be fighting for a President's Trophy as easily as they are out East. Obviously, they're still playing teams from the West, and they've been really, really good. I think we saw that in the game against the Jets. Washington was every bit Winnipeg's equal. But, yeah, it's just one of the scenarios where the Jets are just going to have to do what they can to control their own destiny. That is the nice thing, is that the Jets are in the driver's seat. And so if anything happens, I don't want to say they only have themselves to blame, but, at least the Jets have a little more control over their own fate. They're not relying on others necessarily to dictate what happens with the Jets. We just have to hope that Winnipeg maybe gets a slightly easier playoff route. I think that that's for me, one of the biggest goals, I know it sounds a little bit silly, and some people are like, well, you've got to beat the best to be the best. But you know what? You really don't. Sometimes you have to hope that things are favorable and that you get a matchup and playoff route that is all about the marathon over the sprint, right? If you beat tons of great teams, fantastic, but it's the playoffs. It's a war of attrition. And if you can find a way to ease that burden just a little bit, especially with a strong regular season performance, that does kind of feel like an actual reward. You shouldn't have to go through the hardest of the hardest matchups all the way at the very start of the playoffs. So, curious to know if you think the Jets are still going to win the West. Drop your predictions below. I do think they will. I think it's going to be very tight, though. I could see it coming down to even a 1 or 2 point margin by the end of the season. But let me know your predictions for the West in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a little bit, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the wild card races. I think the wild card in the West is particularly interesting, and even the Canucks are not quite out of it yet. So, with all of that in mind, this is going to be a fascinating final run to the end of the season, man. I didn't really imagine that all of this would get to this tight of a spot, but here we are, and Winnipeg is right in the middle of all of it. But we'll chat about that wild card race in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, thought you should hear about our partners and friends at Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates quickly? Well, it's easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. I've actually used Indeed when I was looking for work years ago. I can personally attest to the fact that their resume builder is powerful, it's convenient, and when you actually submit all your information and get it in, Indeed immediately pulls up job postings that are relevant to your domain of expertise, your work experience, your skills, and your salary requirements. So, as an employer, I can only imagine that this is a fantastic way to find qualified employees and candidates really quickly. This is a great matching service. I think it's very convenient, and I have to imagine for small business owners and even larger business owners, it's great. It'll pull up results very quickly. You'll have plenty of guarantees. And again, having a sponsored jobs option that gets your post towards the top of the page, make sure that you are at the front of the pack. And if you want to get a little bit of a nice little bonus, our listeners can actually get a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on the Locked On Winnipeg Jets podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are just closing out with some thoughts on the emerging wildcard race and how it has been absolutely crazy. The Wild and the Blues are really locked in this bit of a dead heat. I was kind of hoping the Caps would maybe do the Jets a little bit of a favor against Minnesota this evening. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, so the Wild have won, which is fine. But I think for the Jets, obviously, we would much prefer to see Minnesota than St. Louis. And the Blues have won an 8th straight game, man. They are just on an absolute tear. I know that we kind of have visions of the first half Blues where the Jets did beat them and it wasn't as worrisome, but like the St. Louis squad is currently top 10 in a lot of league metrics. They are starting to really push the pace. Offensively, they've really turned things around. They now have one of the better offenses in the West cumulatively. And defensively, they're still a little bit loose, but the goaltending has tightened things up. And they are just generally controlling play at a pretty great rate. So my gut feeling is that despite, having played one more game than Minnesota, I do think that they move into wild card one. They're only 2 points back. I think, Minnesota is injured enough to where I just don't really see them having that great of a run. It's not like, Minnesota's road over the next couple of weeks is going to be super, super easy. They're going to have some difficult opponents. They're going to face teams like the Stars and, Vancouver, a couple of other squads that are still chasing a playoff spot. The Rangers and Islanders are both going to see them in a couple of weeks. And for the Jets, that's probably favorable. You want the Wild on the road. You want them tired. You want them facing teams that are chasing desperately a playoff spot. Even the Flames are in this mix. So, I do think the Blues are kind of in good spots. I think St. Louis is going to win at some point. I think they're going to overtake the Wild. And for the Jets, that's much more favorable. A Vegas St. Louis series as a first round is fantastic for the Jets, partly because, again, kind of like the Dallas Colorado scenario, you want one of the Blues or Knights guaranteed to be out. And while Vegas has been one of the best teams in the league this year, St. Louis is now putting itself in that conversation for the second half of the season. And the first half, you don't even have to worry about anymore, right? Yes, again, the Blues back end is a little bit on the rough side and it's injured, but their offense has been so good that I think you start to think about whether or not St. Louis might actually advance to the second round. After that, that starts to get a little more of an interesting conversation. I think Winnipeg is probably going to be keeping a close eye on the seeding distribution to figure out, who their next opponent might be if they get through their first round against, say, the Wild. But yeah, I mean, what an interesting race. And what's also very curious and something to keep a close eye on is that Calgary and Vancouver are still hanging in there. Calgary actually has 4 games in hand on the Blues and a couple of games in hand on the Wild. They are an interesting team in that I don't really see them climbing out of the hole that they're in, but the Flames have typically been, lower event. Earlier this season, they've played, a tighter defensive style. They can be fun. They can be fast. Sometimes they can also be a bit of a chore to watch, depending on which version of the Flames you get. They are actually looking like they're going to drop points here to the Stars. So that's, one more game off their games in hand rotation. But man, this is interesting, right? If either of Vancouver or Calgary makes it, then that's probably the matchup you would want for the Jets. Calgary, I guess you may not be as big a fan of because Dustin Wolf could be enough to really upset a series in a short sample. Vancouver, their offense is a little more potent than the Flames are. I'd be a bit more concerned about them, but not to where I don't think the Jets can take care of business. Again, if we're talking about teams that are more preferable than St. Louis, anyone other than St. Louis would be my preference. I don't even care if it's Minnesota or Vancouver or Calgary. Any of these teams that want to sneak into a wild card spot and be Winnipeg's first round opponent, by all means, do it. We'd love to see you. St. Louis, let's pump the brakes and hope that we don't see them at all. I think if the Jets were to face them in a subsequent round, I don't really worry about that so much, but definitely not early on. Let's see them after they've been a little bit more tired. Lord knows we're probably going to have our hands full with at least one of Dallas or Colorado in one of these subsequent rounds. So, let's try and space out our fun, right? Give the Jets at least some breathing room because, man, again, it is a marathon, not a sprint. And for Winnipeg, it's going to be a pretty bumpy ride, but I'm hopeful that the Jets can pull off some really fun stuff and come away with, a really deep playoff run. That's what we all want. We haven't seen one in forever, and we deserve it. And if we actually go through with all of this and the Caps take care of their side of the bracket, maybe we finally get the playoff matchup that we've deserved for a Cup Finals. Washington, Winnipeg. Could you imagine if we finally get that series? Be great for me because I'll actually be local on the DC side and I can go to those games. I'm already hoping that I can get up to Winnipeg at some point during this playoff run. So we'll just have to play it by ear and see what happens. But as always, let me know how you're feeling about all of these wildcard races. Who do you want the Jets to play in the first round? Drop your comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we will have a recap of Winnipeg versus New Jersey, hoping it is a victory. But like I said, have a great night. As always, see you around and go Jets go.